Good morning, everybody. My name is Mariam Bacher, and I'm here for the Federal Agency for Civic Education. I very much welcome you all to the second edition of Truth and Relevance in the Digital Space, which is a cooperation between the Federal Cybersecurity Authority and us. We had a first session in October on the topic of cyberspace, a very broad overview how it worked, what are the opportunities, what are the risks. And today I wanted to talk about one widespread risk, about disinformation and misinformation and how to tackle this problem. And I invited two very, very knowledgeable guests. One is Safa Ghnaim from Tactical Tech. Hello, Safa, which is an international organization dealing with cyber security, how is the impact of technology on society. And our second guest is Lutz Güllner. Hello, Lutz. He is the head of the strategic communications of the European External Action Service. I'm very, very happy and excited to have you both here and to discuss the next 45 minutes about the challenges of disinformation, what can be done on an individual level, but also on a political level. So I want to give you the floor first. Maybe Safa, you're leading the data detox kit of the Technical Tech. Maybe you want to quickly give us a brief introduction of what you do and what it is about.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And I really appreciate the invitation to come and to talk alongside with Lutz. I work at Tactical Tech. We're based in Berlin, but we're an international nonprofit organization. And it's, a big joy in my work is having international partnerships, and not only in order to work in different regions around the world, but also to learn from the situations and locational experiences that people have in different places. So I lead the Data Detox Kit project, and this is a free online resource. It's a series of guides which look at a number of different topics, from how to control your data privacy, digital security, digital well-being, and also how to combat misinformation. So especially in 2020, this has been a really big focus of my work, reading reports, news articles, investigations that other media agencies and organizations have led, and kind of turning that into something actionable. What can people do with that? So I'm really excited again to talk today and to bring a lot of examples also from Tactical Tech, from my organization, but also from other organizations that are doing great work in this field. So thank you.
Thank you, Safa. And Lutz, you're heading or leading, among other things, the eStratCom task force. Maybe you also quickly want to explain what it is and what you're doing.
Well, thank you and good morning, first of all, to everybody. I'm really happy to be with you here. I'm working for the European External Action Service. That is nothing else but the diplomatic arm of the EU, the foreign service, so to say, of the European Union. And we have created about 5 or 6 years ago a team that is specifically there to look at disinformation campaigns. We will talk about actors in a moment, but this one is particularly about disinformation coming from Russian sources, from pro-Kremlin sources. And we have built a team, an operation that has 3 main objectives or 3 main tasks. The first one is to detect, to analyze, and also to expose kinds of disinformation that is coming from external actors. Never forget that I work for the External Action Service, so I'm not so much looking inside the EU. I'm more looking from what is coming from outside, how do we need to address it, etc. The second point is we work very closely with media representatives, independent media, especially outside the European Union, but also with a lot of civil society organizations. And the third one is we also communicate. That's why the word strategic communications in my team. We engage with partners to explain not only what the EU does, but also to prevent, let's say, some of the disinformation already by proactive communications. That's in short what we are doing, and I'm sure we'll go much more into detail in a second.
Thank you very much. Before we go into hard facts, I wanted to ask you one question. What would it mean to live in a world we cannot differentiate between true and fake? Safa, do you want to start?
Sure. I mean, I laughed a little when you asked, because in some ways it feels like we're a little bit there already, especially with a number of really big conspiracy theories, for example, which have taken over. But that's an extreme example. Looking at a less extreme example, even just the disinformation or misinformation we've seen about the coronavirus, let's say, in the last months, it really has made it feel like I'm living in a different world than, some people who I work with or that some of my friends or family. So, it's definitely polarizing in many ways, including in giving us a sense of, well, this is all you need to do to be safe and that's it. Or, this is the cause of that. So I feel like in a lot of ways it's happened, and it's kind of perpetuated a lot by social media, making it very easy to spread this information and also to see kind of the influences we receive from foreign bad actors, for example, or even, national bad actors as well.
Well, I think we should be careful in saying there is a perfect world where everything is true and only fact-based, and the other one is kind of exactly the mirror image. We're human beings. We're subjective kind of in our perceptions and our feelings, and that has always been like that and will always be like that. And that's why we should also be very careful in kind of putting this into two boxes that are kind of a black and a white box or something, true and false. Because there are a lot of gray zones. But what is really the point, and I think we'll get to this, is what do we do if people want to use these gray zones, to push their own agenda, either for political reasons or for economic reasons, if they start to manipulate us, if they start to intentionally mislead us? That is the problem. And I think I need to say it right at the outset. This is not about judging what people should say, what they should think. Everybody is entitled to have maybe a very bizarre opinion. That's absolutely fine. But as long as people don't start manipulating others. So I see it a bit as our own task here. And I think this also includes kind of the NGO community. I don't know, you may also comment on this. I see it a bit as consumer protection, if you want, to a certain extent. I can go into a supermarket and buy things that are bad, if I want it. Yes, that's possible. But I don't want to be misled, I want to at least have the judgment or to judge myself what I take as it. And I think this is a very important kind of distinction.
Yeah, talking about distinction, maybe we can talk a little bit about the terms. What is misinformation? What is disinformation? And what is fake news? I mean, maybe you can just briefly analyze these terms.
Shall I kick off this time? And then that is not always kind of the same pattern. I think it's boring to see it always 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. No, I think, Marianne, that's an extremely important question, because we give a label, disinformation, to very, very different and distinct issues at the moment. And that creates confusion, that creates blurred lines. And in my view, this is one of the problems that we have, that we didn't really find a good way of describing what the problem is. I would suggest kind of three different boxes for the phenomenon that we are seeing. And I think you mentioned it already. There is conspiracy theory. There is kind of whatever kind of semi fake news, whatever you want to give it as a label. But I suggest three categories. The first one is misinformation. Misinformation for me is maybe untrue, maybe even harmful kind of information that is being spread and shared with, or even produced without an intention to mislead. So people don't know, or they believe it, or it's not their idea to mislead, to really kind of have this idea to manipulate others. It's a total different category from what we would call disinformation, in the sense of created and disseminated to deceive, to mislead, to manipulate. Very often coordinated as well between different actors. So it's not just one individual, it's a network of people as well. And that is something very different from the first category. And then we have a third category that we are looking at here in the External Action Service. That is, of course, also foreign interference. So either state or non-state actors. Just to mention one of them, for example, terrorist groups like Daesh, they have used this confusion also in the COVID-19 situation and have produced a lot of disinformation, clearly misleading, clearly manipulating people for their own political aims. And I think that's only one way of maybe distinguishing, but we need to do it. Otherwise, we get into trouble in saying, you want to say what is right and what is wrong, what is true and what is false, which is nothing else but censorship. We don't want this. We just want to protect against manipulation.
Yeah, I mean, that really makes sense, these three categories. Safa, maybe you want to tell us a little bit more what is problematic with the use of term of fake news.
Absolutely, yeah. So, I think when referring to any kind of misleading information, if you're looking for a quick kind of umbrella term to use, I would suggest using misinformation, especially if you don't know the intention, you don't know the background. Misinformation is a nice, quick way to communicate that. The reason why it's not preferred to use a term like fake news is because, in fact, already just looking at the term fake news, it's already quite misleading. It misses a big piece of the puzzle because oftentimes misinformation is rooted in some reality, some truth, some facts. And so it's not completely fake. Fake is a great way to discredit and immediately shut down a conversation, especially if you're talking about like someone in a position of power, for example, a politician who's using the term fake news. That's a way to shut down a journalist or a survivor without further, having a calm discussion about it. And that's why, yeah, fake news, it doesn't really make sense. What does it actually mean? What is fake, So it's not helpful. I think, for a while there may have been a bit of novelty in using that term as a quick way to refer to things, but I think the novelty has worn off. It's I would suggest misinformation is a good term.
Yeah, you both brought us some examples of misinformation or disinformation. You both mentioned the coronavirus. These days we heard we are very close to a vaccine. How is the coronavirus used for actors to spread misinformation or disinformation? And we go into the differentiation again. What kind of intention is behind that a little bit later, but maybe we work with an example and discuss it.
I could start maybe. I guess I find it very difficult actually to separate the intentionality from the actual information. So, kind of building off what Lutz was saying, I think especially when it comes to coronavirus information, let's say, that we've seen, I think a lot of it is shared by people with a good intention, at least when it comes to sort of the end users, the people who are afraid and confused and find a piece of information and think, well, I'll share it because maybe this will help someone. So I really don't want to lay the blame on any individuals, because I think, especially in the pandemic, we're kind of all doing our best. But I think with that said, I think we've seen a number of examples, for example, coming out of the United States of, the President Trump just kind of spreading, I guess you could call it tips, not really great tips on how he was imagining people could stay safe from the virus. And of course, these were things like bleach, which actually could really severely harm people. And so, kind of leaving intention aside from the president, let's say the other people who were sharing it on the ground, the end users who were sharing that, I think it came with a feeling of fear and wanting to help their loved ones in their communities. And so, of course, the sort of danger of sharing anything that you think maybe this helps is that we're we're adding to this kind of information pollution, this kind of chaotic source of information where it's very difficult then, when I receive a forwarded message on WhatsApp, to find the source of that, to find the root of it. So turning to reliable sources, such as the World Health Organization, who has a really great Mythbusters section with questions and answers. This is one way that we can actually start to tackle these. If we see an example of a cure for coronavirus, perhaps then we can turn to these really trusted leaders, these really global leaders in health, to find those answers, to explain, what is this about? What is this really about, to support us?
So Lutz, what is the difference now with a clear intention of sharing disinformation during the pandemic?
I mean, if you can maybe show slide number 2, just to get visuals for those who are watching us, who are listening in. And in principle, I fully agree with Safa. It is very difficult to distinguish, who has the intention, who doesn't have the intention. But that's why maybe my work is a little bit, I don't want to call it easier, because it's still not clear sometimes where things are coming from. But if actors from outside kind of produce and push kind of certain narratives and multiply them and really push them out, then there is a clear intention. Otherwise, this wouldn't happen. So if you see this slide here in the corner next to me, these were kind of 5 specific narratives that we have seen, let's say, repeated all over during the COVID times. The United States created it. The EU fails to respond. The coronavirus is not serious, etc., etc. Now, we need to be very clear here. This is not about criticizing that somebody believes one or the other element, or maybe even all elements. You're entitled to believe it. If you think the EU failed to respond, then this is, of course, kind of fine for you to think so, even if I would argue it wasn't the case. The problem here is that we have seen kind of very coordinated, I would use the term campaigns, to really deploy this narrative through media, through social media, and we can link it back. We can link it back to a lot of, in that case, what we call pro-Kremlin state media that have deliberately pushed this, not in Russia, but into the EU. And that I find very problematic. If you can go to slide number 4, please, I give you a more tangible example. No, number 4, if you go one back. Perfect. Look, this is just one incident. It is a Sputnik, Germany. Sputnik is financed by the Russian state. And an article that says that washing your hands does not help at all. While at that time, not only at that time, it was always clear that this is maybe the best way of combating the virus, So my question, and really I formulate it as a question, why should a state-sponsored news outlet, why should they distribute this into another country. This is clearly targeted for German-speaking readership, financed by the Russian state. So what is behind it? Why is this happening? I formulate it as a question. I think this is kind of helping you also to see this. Well, our analysis is that there is an underlying kind of issue there, that there is a bit a narrative of weakening, let's say, the trust in democratic or in the, let's say, state structures to deal with this issue. I don't know what the long-term intention is, but in this one, I don't have any other example or any other explanation than explaining this example. So this is just to give a bit of a few more tangible things, maybe if you can go on. This is not only about Corona. If you can go to slide number 6, please. We have it also on other issues. You heard about the poisoning of Mr. Navalny. I mean, this was pretty straightforward. But here you see something else. RT Germany, RT Deutsch, has become the second most shared kind of source on Navalny poisoning in Germany, which is quite amazing, given that RT is not kind of one of the key, let's say, sources in social media. So again, here, I wanted to make my point, and the point is not so much that RT is not entitled to write whatever they want, but in my view, they are not entitled to disseminate it, to amplify it in the way that they want it, and in the end, also mislead and manipulate people because they think it is maybe the mainstream thinking, maybe this is what everybody's talking about, and in fact, it was not. So these are just a few examples to give a bit of something tangible for our conversation as well.
Yeah, I mean, when you see such posts like the Navalny poisoning, but also like hand washing, I mean, washing your hands is not really doing anything about infectious diseases. Safa, maybe you know or can give some hands-on tips when I, as an individual, see this in my Facebook feed or get it from a family member in my WhatsApp chat. What shall I do?
That's great, a great question. And, I think from what I've seen from, especially from the experts, for example, there was a report in First Draft, which is a sort of leading organization in the UK to combat misinformation, at least as part of their initiative. They identified that the types of articles and postings on social media, on WhatsApp, which are the most likely to go viral, are those which provoke our emotions, which trigger an emotional response. The strong emotions, disgust, awe, anger, fear. These are those which are most likely to be shared right away. And so I think kind of as a first step, maybe we don't always know right away that we should be looking and investigating further, or maybe we don't always have the time to do it. But what we can do is we can identify if we have seen a headline which has made us feel strongly or felt shocked or surprised, this is a red flag. This is a red flag in our brains, and we can use it to say, okay, maybe I shouldn't share this right away. Maybe I should look into, for example, a fact-checking website first before I share it with my friends and family. For example, PolitiFact, Snopes, again, the World Health Organization, I can take a look if I know that feeling. But then the other side of it is if you do have the time and the chance to, if it's an article that, really surprised you, for example, this coronavirus potential vaccine, this would be a really good chance over a coffee to practice a little bit of, investigation skills. There's a lot of information online, but there are also a lot of great tools to support us. As one example, last year in 2019, during the Amazon wildfires, this is a very light example. There were pictures floating around on social media shared by Madonna, French President Emmanuel Macron, about the Amazon fire. It was very devastating, of course. But upon investigation, I believe it was the Journal of Mother Jones, which found it upon further investigation, that photograph, which was going viral, being shared in 2019, was actually a photograph from 1989. And, you know, in this case, it was still from the Amazon, it was still from a wildfire. And at the end of the day, there was still this devastating catastrophe. That's not to say that there wasn't, but it was just a great example of this is a photo which is shared out of context, used in another way. It's so easy to do that. And we can use tools like tineye.com, for example, to do a reverse image search. And this is something that can be done within a matter of minutes. It's very quick to do. So if you identify those strong feelings, this is a good place to start.
So I guess, Lutz, for your department, it's a little bit harder, the fact-checking or the strategies, what to do with the narratives, because it's not only one single post, it's probably thousands of posts, or not only on the level of social media, but maybe TV, maybe in connection with other political parties. So it's more widespread. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about how the European Union is teaming up against disinformation and what is done on a regulatory level.
Yeah, I think Safa made a very, very important point just that misinformation, disinformation is not necessarily linked to wrong facts. You know, again, I come back to the word that I used already a couple of times. It's the fact of manipulation, you know, of pushing people into something, of misleading with information, and that is really the issue. So just to have a full understanding also for our discussion with those of you who are watching, you know, again, this is not about censorship. This is not about telling what is right or wrong. This is about protecting consumers, for those who are participating in the information space, that they are not manipulated. I think this is the key thing. So what can we do? We can do 4 or 5 kind of different things, and we need to do them all at the same time. First of all, we need to understand what is happening, actually, because misinformation, disinformation is a very, very quickly changing phenomenon. You know, what we have seen maybe 5 or 6 years ago, you remember the US elections 4 years ago, that's when everything kind of was came into the public kind of attention, let's call it like this. That is, or the techniques used at that time are not used anymore, or not in the same form. It has shifted on. It is now more about new technical kind of possibilities. It's even moving away from the very classic kind of social media platforms. So this understanding, this continuing investment into what is happening, I think, is super important. Second point for us as governments, maybe that's a little bit less important for those who are watching, you know, is we, of course, also need to say what we are doing. We need to communicate clearly, saying kind of what is happening. How do we approach kind of the crisis? What are the things that we are doing about it? We need to become better also in our own communications, you know, so to become, let's say, a source. But most important, I think we need to work also with, let's say, the civil society organizations, and very different ones. Safa is a good example, but we also need to work with the social media platforms. They have a lot of, let's say, a very important role to play. I think we cannot blame everything on them, but they play a crucial role in the dissemination of these kind of misinformation and disinformation. And that's why 2 things are crucial. Transparency, So what is happening on these platforms? Who's doing what? But also to give people like Safa access, to investigate, to see what is happening. And there we haven't seen a lot of progress yet from the platform. And on the other hand, I think the platforms are also, they have a duty, to be, or they are accountable also how they treat the issue, because at the moment it's their places where these things are happening. So that's why this kind of work to ensure let's say proper handling of the issue, proper measures, to prevent it is crucial. And then last but not least, I mentioned it already, the close support for organizations like Safa's, but many others, is crucial, because this is an issue that is a societal issue. It's not for the governments to solve. And I would argue the governments shouldn't play a role at all in the future. This should really, really be about the civil society kind of defining what the rules of the game are. But the governments need to step in when there are things to regulate, for example, with the social media platforms. If things are not working, that is, I think, where we need to step in. And this is what we are doing at the moment here.
So you mentioned the role of the platforms. Maybe how do private platforms react to the disinformation? A lot has been done in flagging disinformation or misinformation, or also to putting down hate speech online. But I would say a lot of things can be done better. Maybe you can tell me what should be done better or different than it is at the moment now.
Well, I mentioned I let Safa also speak more on this, because you are much more in the thick of it. But we, from a governmental perspective, would ask the platforms to do two things. The first one is, I mentioned it before, be transparent about what is happening on your platform. Give us access, not us as governments, but us in terms of society, that we understand who is using what type of technique. And the second point is kind of if let's say the own systems of the platforms are being tricked, by using methods of amplification, which gives much more prominence to these misinformation, or to these actors who want to spread misinformation, then the platforms need to react to that. For example, to check their own algorithms. For example, to look at how this is being amplified and distributed. I think this is really, really crucial. Maybe allow me just to say that the platforms have invested a lot over the past few month since Corona. And I think there's also a moment to say, okay, we recognize and we acknowledge that they have done much more than in the past. But I think it is a continuous issue where they need to act. But not the entire blame can go on the platforms, because we see strategies that use different forms, not only the platforms, but also closed messaging services. It goes back to websites. It goes back to new chat kind of services that we haven't seen beforehand. So let's also not just focus on the 2 or 3 big platforms. This is a little bit more complex. But civil society should be in the lead. And this is where we need to strengthen the resilience of the society.
I really appreciate that. Yeah, I do agree that it is a very complex situation, complex solution too. There's not going to be a one size fits all, because of course, even when we're looking at these different platforms, we're talking about, let's say, WhatsApp. Which is a messenger service, which is, it's very easy to forward things. It's still maybe too easy, but they've already made some strides to make it less easy to share with, everyone in your contact list at one time. So they've already made that measure. But you're right there. I haven't seen, for example, labels that are specific to a forward I get on coronavirus, let's say. But I think at the same time, there are other organizations that are out there who are, kind of in the forefront at trying to find those solutions. My work at Tactical Tech, I'm more so exploring what the consumer can do, not so much what the platforms can do. But from a consumer perspective, I have definitely seen the very different ways in which content is being labeled. So for example, on Twitter, we see a variety of different, small notes, and there have been times, for example, in the last week during the presidential elections in the United States, where some of Donald Trump's posts were actually hidden and you had to click in order for it to be visible. And I found that was actually quite a helpful move, because I find that these small notes, especially when they're the same notes, are very easy for us to ignore when we keep seeing them over and over again. So I found that kind of difference in the design was helpful. But, let's say on Instagram, I think that the notes are maybe too subtle. They are, when you're looking at a whole grid on someone's profile, like Donald Trump, you don't see any notes. You don't see, and, let's even move it away from politics, even just talking about advertisements. We don't see these notes very easily. And when you click into a posting, you see #ad somewhere hidden in the body of the description, or these small notes about, this claim may be disputed. But I think that there is more that they can do, visually speaking, for consumers like me to more quickly identify, oh, there's something wrong with this, or, oh, this is an advertisement. This isn't, just a beautiful picture of someone eating pizza. They're selling me jeans. And I think that there is more they can do to put those labels on to make it helpful. It's not so much, like Lutz said, it's not about censorship. It's not about removing all of these postings, let's say, especially when we're talking about something like an advertisement. It's just that we need to have the chance to make an informed decision. We need to have the tools at our disposal. And, if something is properly labeled, I can still decide to use the tool. I can still decide to believe that information or not believe it, or share it or not share it. But at least then I have more of this choice. This agency is a little bit more on my side, which I think right now it's quite lacking. There's more that can happen.
So talking about more of that, what can happen, maybe you brought some best practice examples with you. Lutz, I want to start with you. When you think about the states in the European Union or the states worldwide, when you look as a team for strategies or input, what can be done better? Where do you look at, or what kind of strategies are fruitful in certain countries or in certain areas?
Well, I think we need to address the issue kind of in short-term solutions, in medium-term and long-term solutions. And I think short-term, one of the key issues is calling out those actors and those instances where we see that kind of not disinformation occurs, but where we can dismantle it, where we can show, that there has been an attempt to mislead, to manipulate, And this is, I think, crucial also, because to raise awareness about it, to really make people aware that there can be that there are these attempts all the time. In the medium term, we need to have much more robust kind of systems in place that help kind of govern this area. I talked about kind of the role of the platforms, but this is not only the platforms. This is an entire kind of digital ecosystem, that needs to get to grips, with this issue. And if we speak here a lot about Twitter and Facebook, that is absolutely justified. But at the same time, we see a lot of things happening on much smaller platforms, on also whatever. To give you another example of what we are discovering is more and more websites, that work with so-called authenticity, but they are not authentic, and we need to call out these instances. We need to make them kind of visible and tangible for people. And the long-term element is exactly what we discussed beforehand. This is about media literacy. This is about education. My kids, for example, they discuss it with me, so they are super sensitive about it, and they look very time in kind of what could be and what could not be, whatever misleading or falsified, etc. They follow a lot of these programs also that is uncovering these moments of manipulation. But I think it should be one of the key skills that not only kids but everybody in this society should have. It is very difficult to detect. It is extremely difficult. And again, as we discussed beforehand, it is important to develop reflexes in our digital behavior. A reflex to question, not to get suspicious at everything that I see. But if there's a website that kind of produces a lot of content, and I have no idea where this content is coming from, what this website is doing, and I see that this is a very popular website, then at least I should have a look at who's behind this, Is there enough information? Is there enough kind of knowledge about this? And it's very easy. Everybody can look into kind of the reference points, the impressum or whatever it is, It is possible. So these reflexes are super important to develop. But as I said, there are very different things that we need to do at the same time. And I think we mentioned some of them already earlier.
That's great. If I might add as well, to extend on the piece of media literacy, there are a number of free resources that anyone can go to learn more, to sharpen up their skills. I think this isn't just a generational issue, of course. Anyone, as Lutz said, it's very difficult to spot, so anyone can be susceptible to misinformation. So we can all do with a good sharpening. So for example, at Tactical Tech, we have a project called The Glass Room, which has a free online exhibition focusing around misinformation. And in this exhibition, you can explore different topics like how are deepfakes made. You can also look at how there's an Ocean tool test, which looks at how personality profiling works. The same kind of systems that are in place which figure out which targeted ads best to target us with, best suited to be shown to us on, for example, Facebook, on social media. And we can take an Ocean tool test. We don't save that information. There's a pretty good data use disclaimer, but it's very informative just to understand how that works. And beyond Tactical Tech, there are many other great organizations I would recommend. For example, Policy.org in Uganda, they have this Choose Your Fake News game. It sort of gives people a chance to see how something might look in a different news feed and to spot the misinformation. There's, Pointer Institute, which has been a world leader in training, journalists, for example, but really anyone in particular against misinformation. They have MediaWise for seniors, which is training for seniors. There are many resources for youth. Like in our Data Detox Kit, we have some resources like printable PDFs for youth to look at and to fill out and to sort of practice this critical thinking, because at the end of the day, that's a big piece of media literacy, is practicing what are even the questions to ask, and then asking those questions anytime we're faced with something that we're uncertain about or feel strongly about, those shocking, surprising anger feelings that I discussed earlier. So there are so many resources. I think a lot of times librarians around the world a kind of harbor, they hold on to a great deal of these resources. So if you're in, a certain city with limited connectivity, I think you should always reach out to your local librarians. They have some great resources for you.
Yeah, thank you very much for the tips. We are also on the website of the Federal Agency for Civic Education. We also have a list of tools and where to go, and maybe not only for the English-speaking world, but also for the German-speaking world. So like Safa said, there's a lot of material out there. We will also, after this session, we will add some links on the website. Also, your website, for example, Lutz, is a great resource how to deal with this topic. We are running out of time, unfortunately. It's a very interesting discussion. I have one last question from a user. He is asking, or she is asking, would a duty to use the real name help to reduce the problem of shared false information? What would you say? I mean, if someone who is sharing, I mean, I guess it's more the one who is producing false information than the one who is sharing, because often this is with real name, I guess, if I get it from my mother.
Well, I mean, as Safa said, there is no kind of silver bullet. There is no kind of perfect kind of element in there. Of course, to have a bit clearer ideas whose identity is out there is helpful. But I need to qualify this very, very carefully. We see that in a lot of countries, in particular outside of the European Union, social media is a fantastic forum that protects kind of independent voices as well, you know. And I think it's extremely important that sometimes people can also speak, let's say, without being identified, because it is an important measure to guarantee the freedom of expression and freedom of speech. And this is not something that we would like to change. But somehow we need to find the balance, you know, if people misuse this and whatever, and or use it, you know, to manipulate rather than to voice their own opinion, then we have the situation as we see it now. So I don't think that is kind of the silver bullet for everything. I would rather go into the question of the duty for websites, you know, to show how they're financed, where the information is coming from, editorial kind of guidelines also, that we need also quality, I mean, to ensure high quality journalism in the end, you know, because sometimes you cannot really distinguish, is this now serious journalism, or is this somebody who wants to tell me something, or somebody who wants to manipulate me? This is really the issue here. So I think as soon as we talk about content, it needs to be clear. Is this an opinion? Is this something that somebody states and wants to share, but then he or she needs to make very clear where it comes from and what the relevance to this is. And I think the key word here is trustworthy sources. It's easier said than done. You know, we all know this, but just that we are able to trace back is a bit of like in scientific work. Whatever you claim in a good scientific work, you need to have a proof for it. And I think whatever you say in an article and you use a fact, you know, you need to be able to relate to that. Where does it come from? It doesn't. Let's say it doesn't push you away from having your own opinion and to state your opinion. That's absolutely fine. But the moment you underpin this opinion with facts, you know, please be sure and make sure where you have these facts from. I think this is maybe a first step in kind of an etiquette, you know, that would be important.
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, I need to close this very inspiring session. Two tags I would take with me, so to say, to combat misinformation, disinformation. It would be transparency and critical thinking. I thank you so much for taking the time and talking with us. And yeah, please stay healthy.
Thank you so much. You too.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.